Alright, well, by Jhonnel Mac's request, DoctorOMalley is now going to read Sweet Apple Massacre. If I'm not pronouncing your name right, please tell me. This is a My Little Pony Friendship is Magic gorefic. This is rated M, if not adult only, for the following: blood and gore, heavy sexual content, child abuse and rape, and murder. Let's begin. Big Macintosh surveyed the many apples that made up Sweet Apple Acres. It was nearly apple buck season once again, and it looked as though they would be having a bumper harvest this year. He nodded, satisfied. His sister Applejack walked up behind him. Oh God, I hate doing voices. Woo, boy howdy. I am sure I am glad you aren't you ain't injured this time, Big Mac, she said. Why, there's even more apples on them trees than last year. Yup, Big Macintosh replied, in his characteristic manner. Them's a lot of apples. Applejack went silent in the model, for a moment, enjoying the feel of the slight breeze behind her. Say, I don't suppose you've seen Apple Bloom anywhere, have you? I've been looking for her all day, and she isn't anywhere to be found. Big Macintosh shook his head. Sorry, sis, I can't say I have. Darn, that silly filly's probably gone off somewhere with her friends. I just hope she ain't getting herself into any mischief, or there'd be hell to pay. Don't go worrying yourself, Applejack. I'm sure she's perfectly fine. But anyway, I need to go back to the barn. I gotta go press some apples from some of my home-brewed apple cider. I hoof-picked a few apples earlier, especially, all nice and plump and ripe, and they ain't gonna press themselves. Applejack laughed. You sure don't love your cider, don't you? Just make sure Apple Bloom doesn't get her hooves on it again. Hooves, wow. We all know what happened last time. Big Macintosh chuckled along with his sister. Yup. The large red pony trotted back to the barn and gently closed the door. He opened a trap door with his mouth and went down the steps into the old disused apple cellar. Usually it was filled with junk, scrap metal, old worn-out ploughs, old rope, and various other bits and bobs that outlived their usefulness. Big Macintosh often came down here when he wanted to get away from the world, to withdraw for a little while for some peace and quiet. Today was different, however. The old rope, at least, had found a new use, because in the cellar space were Apple Bloom and her fellow Cutie Mark Crusaders, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, bound and gagged, propped up against the walls. 3 pairs of scared, round eyes looked up at Big Macintosh as he approached. Now then, you 3 fillies, he said, placid as ever. Y'all need to learn a lesson. You need to learn to not mess around with Big Macintosh. All I want is some peace and quiet, he said, looking at Apple Bloom. Blah. Can't speak. Little red-haired filly cowered under his gaze. All I want is a quiet life, without you Cutie Mark Crusaders running around the place, making all the noise. When I'm finished with you all, there's going to be no noise from you ever again. As Big Mac approached, Scootaloo flapped his wings, struggling to get off the ground. Big Macintosh laughed and grabbed one of his wings. He twisted, first and slow, watching the pain visibly grow in her eyes, but then tore hard, smiling slightly when he heard the snap and muffled whimper that came from Scootaloo. He then threw her to the ground. Reminds me of Cupcakes. Your wings are useless, you silly filly. He then went to a toolbox and took out a rusty knife with a jagged blade and dropped it in front of the 3 fillies. Jesus Christ, this is freaking Cupcakes. I'm gonna take off these gags now, he said. The first one to scream gets their tongue cut out. He took off Sweetie Belle's gag first. She looked up at him with terror, but managed to stay quiet. Next was Scootaloo. She let out a strangled whine and was breathing heavily, still in horrendous pain from her broken wing, but managed to resist the temptation. Finally, he removed the gag from his sister Apple Bloom. She stared at him with her large round eyes filled with fear and incomprehension. This was Big Macintosh, after all. Her big brother, and the gentlest of souls, wasn't he? Surely this was just a horrible joke. But she had seen what he had done to Scootaloo's wing, and it was definitely no joke. She took a deep breath. Applejack! Big Macintosh shoved his hook into Apple Bloom, Jesus Christ. Apple Bloom's mouth, silencing her scream. He sighed and shook his head. I told you not to scream, Apple Bloom. You should have listened to your big brother. I'll scream, and I'll scream again, and Applejack will hear, and Apple Bloom said falteringly, You know, I kinda hope you do. After all, I still have forgiven Applejack for that injury she gave me last apple buck season. If you want Applejack to join y'all down here, scream anyway. I, for one, would welcome her company. But now, down to business. Big Macintosh picked up the knife and loomed over... Crap, I lost... Okay. Big Macintosh picked up the knife and loomed over the cowering Apple Bloom. He pinned her down with a powerful hoof and sucked the knife into Apple Bloom's mouth. Sweetie Belle vomited at the sight, and thick yellow chunks and acidic-smelling liquid spattering heavily on the floor. Scootaloo managed not to be sick, but rather gasped and sobbed and choked with panic. Big Macintosh forced open Apple Bloom's mouth and with his mother cut out her tongue. Apple Bloom tried to scream, but her mouth was too full of blood, so it was more of a muted gurgle. After a short while, she collapsed, tears streaming from her eyes. Falling unconscious from the shock and the pain, Big Macintosh took the tongue and rolled it into the pile of putrid vomit and on the floor. He smiled at Scootaloo. You hungry? Scootaloo shook her head vigorously and cast up a defiant glare. If Rainbow Dash was here, she would kick the crap out of you, you maniac. Big Macintosh shrugged. Well, she ain't. And anyway, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Rainbow Dash ain't as tough as she likes to make out. He shoved the vomit-covered tongue into Scootaloo's mouth and used his hoof, gotta get used to that, to clamp her mouth down. Don't you go trying to spit it out now, he said calmly, with a little laugh, and the filly struggled and squirmed. Didn't your mother ever tell you it was how important it was to chew your food? Scootaloo closed her eyes and flapped her one good wing desperately, eventually swallowing Apple Bloom's tongue. Big Macintosh, still holding the writhing Scootaloo down with his strong hooves, then mounted the... Now we get into the sexual stuff, so if you don't like sexual gore, not even clop, just... yeah. Okay. Here we go. Big Macintosh, still holding the writhing Scootaloo down with his strong hooves, then mounted the orange filly and slid his penis into her tight virgin pussy. I swear to God, that's what it says. Raping her for several minutes while Sweetie Belle watched, trembling with revulsion. Apple Bloom was still out cold, blood pouring from her torn-up mouth. Cutie Mark creators rape victims, Big Macintosh said with tender mockery as he fucked Scootaloo, followed by a gentle chuckle. Guess you all found your purpose in life now. Your special talent is getting raped. Yep. Eventually he withdrew from Scootaloo and gripped her head tightly and punched her hard with a hoof in the face, causing her nose to shatter and spurt with blood. He scooped up some of the blood and some of Sweetie Belle's vomit with his tongue and held it in his mouth, so that it mixed with his saliva and brought his mouth close to Scootaloo's and spat the rank mixture into her mouth. He clamped his hoof over her mouth and held her nose until she gagged and eventually had no choice but to swallow. As Scootaloo retched and spat and cried, he turned to Sweetie Belle. He grabbed her easily, as she was too shocked and traumatized to respond, and with apparent amusement he rammed her horn up... Jesus. And he rammed her horn up Scootaloo's ass. The horn was too big and hard, so the skin around Scootaloo's ass ripped in blood and fecal matter first trickled and then poured profusely down onto Scootaloo's face, as well as urine as Scootaloo wet herself. You keep doing that, Sweetie Belle. The unicorn carried on... can't freaking speak. Carried on pushing her horn up Scootaloo's anus, slowly but surely. Her normally well-groomed pink and purple mane was now stained a reddish-brown, glistening with the wetness of the piss and blood. If you stop, I'll come over there and, get creative. I may seem a bit dense, but I'm actually quite a creative stallion, you know? Big Macintosh said with a wink. Yep. He went to Apple Bloom and penetrated his little sister's unconscious body with his hard cock. Jesus. When he violated her, and another knife, this one was sharp and shiny, and sliced open her flank, causing her glistening intestines to flop wetly onto the floor. He glanced over and was pleased to see that Sweetie Belle was still using her horn to anally penetrate Scootaloo, and her face was now covered in blood and feces and urine. He turned his attention back to Apple Bloom and scooped up her crimson entrails and wrapped them around her neck, so fucking the filly, and with his front hooves he pulled and pulled until it was wrapped so tightly along... I can't read today. Around Apple Bloom's neck that it broke her windpipe. She was now surely dead, but Big Macintosh continued fucking with her furiously until her body began to lose form and collapse into a quivering, amorphous mass of blood and fur and flesh. The perineum had fallen away, leaving a single red and raw gaping void. He carried on until he was fucking nothing but a single and swollen, bloody orifice, and then discarded his baby sister's carcass as she would nothing more than a rotten apple core. He then took the knife and stabbed Sweetie Belle and tossed her aside. He forced himself into Scootaloo's ruined anus, and then took the knife and cut from her ass into a sweeping motion up to her belly, and all her innards fell out. He grabbed her head, twisted and tore it clean off using his immense strength, and fucked it in the mouth and tossed it aside. He then had sex with her headless body both in the vagina and in the ass until he got bored. Sweetie Belle was the last remaining cutie mark crusader. She was herself barely conscious, overcome with the nauseous stench of blood, shit, and piss that covered her horn and her face. Big Macintosh pinned Sweetie Belle down with his hoof and plunged her knife into her green eye and twisted, causing vitreous fluid to dribble out of the handle. At that, Sweetie Belle let out a throaty whine and involuntarily emptied her bowels. The aroma of fresh urine and feces filled the apple cellar once again. He withdrew the knife and did the same to the other eye, each time holding her tight and sticking his hoof into her mouth to silence her agonized screams. He licked the vitreous fluid that leaked onto the knife and then methodically began cutting and hacking at her left front hoof using the rusty knife. The knife was quite blunt, so it took a Herculean effort to get through the skin, bone, and cartilage, but eventually the bone splintered and the leg came off. He did the same to the other legs until all four were amputated and nothing remained but bloody stumps with slimy white ligament and broken bone shards hanging out. At some point, Sweetie Belle had passed out, the overwhelming pain too much for her to bear. Scrolling. He then used the knife to gouge out her left eye and jammed his penis into her eye socket, penetrating repeatedly deep into her brain, now enjoying how tight her skull went around his heart shaft and how warm and squishy the brain matter felt against the tip of his throbbing penis. I mean, what the fuck? Who writes this? As he did, I still can't read today. As he did, he twisted Sweetie Belle's neck. After he had finished skull fucking her, he cracked open her skull with a swift stamp of the hoof and bent down and ate some of the exposed brain, taking care to spit out a few fragments of skull bone that had gotten mixed in as he chewed. It was warm and slimy though, and stuck to the back of his throat. He swallowed, then raped Sweetie Belle in the ass and tore open an engorged penis with smeared little fecal matter remained in her rectum. Jesus. I apologize. He took one of Sweetie Belle's attached legs and shoved it inside her ass, then fucked Apple Bloom and Scootaloo's body the same way, forcing the amputated limb in, hoof first, as far as it could go. He thought how strange it was that the still lumps of torn flesh that he was fucking with Sweetie Belle's leg had been so vibrant and alive such a short time ago. But now all three were dead, and he finished burning his voluminous load into Apple Bloom's destroyed backside. He watched with satisfaction as the semen and blood and shit mixed together, forming a foamy maroon pool. He bent down and greedily lapped up some of it with his tongue, pressing his thumb deep into her anal cavity so as not to miss any, letting it dribble down his chin. It tasted foul, of course, a rancid, tangy slime that burned his throat, but it felt so satisfying. He swallowed the filthy goo and wiped his mouth with a hoof. It was done. Big Macintosh would finally get some peace and quiet. Big Macintosh, you down there? It was Applejack. He looked at the disfigured corpses of the three fillies, now barely recognizable as the oh-so-sweet Cutie Mark Crusaders, and realized that he felt strangely unsatisfied. It had all been a quick and easy. Now Applejack, that would be a challenge. She was Ponyville's best athlete, after all. And she even had the prize pony of Ponyville trophy. Prize pony of Ponyville, that's original. To prove it. And of course, he still hadn't forgiven her for that injury. He felt his penis stiffen once again in anticipation. Hey, Big Mac, I said, are you down here? Came Applejack's lifting voice again, this time more insistent. Big Macintosh replied serenely, I sure am, sis. Hey, come down here a minute, I got something to show you. Sure thing, what is it? It's a surprise. Oh boy, I sure do love surprises. Something real nice, I bet. Something real nice? Big Macintosh looked at the mangled, mutilated remains of the Cutie Mark Crusaders, and his lips curled into a thin smile. Yup. Who the balls writes this? I mean, seriously now. Who would write that? Nobody in their right freaking mind would ever want to write that. I mean, I've read it previously to this. I could say that, but even still. Ugh, shit, semen, and vomit. Ugh, it's terrible. I don't want to imagine the taste of that. Anyway, you better be happy, Mac, or Jhonnel, or however the fuck I pronounce your name. If I pronounce it wrong, just tell me later. I'm gonna go drink